We are in Genesis. We are in Genesis chapter 6, starting with verse 4. It says, the Nephilim were on earth in these days. Now, the Nephilim are the first people mentioned, and there will be others in the future, about giants. And here, instead of translating it as giants, they have just transliterated it as Nephilim. The I am ending on the word is a Hebrew plural. So the Nephilim, these people, were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. Notice, the giants, the Nephilim, are not the descendants of the sons of God going to the daughters of men and having children by them. No, the giants were already on the earth first, and then also afterwards. So the giants predate these particular unions. So therefore then, who are the descendants of these unions? They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Heroes of old, men of renown. Now tie that in, guess what? In the mythologies, you have a remembrance of this. Who in Greek mythology are the people who defeated the giants? They are the gods. They are the gods and the descendants of the gods, the demigods. These are the people. The gods of Olympus, Mount Olympus, have parentage. They have people who were in charge before them. And so you have the Nephilim who are on the earth in those days. And then afterwards, the sons of God came to daughters of men and had children by them. And these are the heroes of old, the men of renown. The heroes of old, the men of renown, are the descendants of this supernatural and natural union. And they are the ones, not giants, but people of great power, ability, who overcome and defeat the giants, as we can see from other cases. Giants have terrified people because of their sheer size, but here and later we will see that the giants were some of the ones to fall first. When Israel came to and conquered the promised land, Canaan, the giants were some of the people they defeated first. They were not the hardest. They were imposing, they were terrifying, but they were apparently much more primitive. Think of the difference between a huge giant with a club, and he's able to swing his club and demolish and wipe out people, but he hasn't invented, for say, a bow and an arrow. He hasn't invented metallurgy or something, and people who are able to use metal weapons, or people who are able to shoot at him from afar with a bow and arrow, they are able to defeat him, as happened here. The giants were defeated by the men of renown, and happened later in Canaan. Of course, when we say giant and what we're talking about, how big, it may be two different things. We do know a little bit more about how big the giants were of Goliath and his ilk, but that does not mean that these giants were the same size as those ones were. The Lord saw how great men's wickedness on the earth had become. So it was already, there was evil, there was sin when Adam and Eve took the fruit. And then there was murder when Cain killed Abel. But now there's this horrible sex with supernatural beings, and the wickedness is getting worse and worse. God saw how great men's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. Wow, that's getting pretty bad. Not just mostly good and occasionally, but they're just unmitigated evil. And so God was grieved that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. These anthropomorphic expressions in chapter 6. God is grieved and his heart is filled with pain. This brings up the question, which is a good question, about omniscience. If God is omniscient and knows in advance that this is going to be the result, then why did he make man in the first place? And that why do this if you know that this is going to be what happens? So it makes it look like God doesn't know this is going to happen, and that he's sad now that it has happened, and his heart is filled with pain. His heart, that's obviously an anthropomorphic expression. So, but it does bring up, because God does these kind of things later. I am grieved that I've done this. I am sorry. And when he takes the children of Israel into the desert, and they do all kinds of things, and he says, God says to Moses, these people are totally stiff-necked and rebellious, and I'm going to wipe them out and make you a great nation instead. Now, see, if you knew, God, that they were going to be this way, why did you bring them out here? Why not kill a bunch of them off in Egypt, let them die there, and just bring the good ones out to the desert? So we're coming back to the question. The answer to that question is free will. God wants humans to have free will. And humans with free will often don't use it very well. In the garden, they took the fruit. Here, they're becoming obsessed with evil, and God is filled with pain. And God says, verse 7, I will wipe mankind, whom I have created, from the face of the earth. Men and animals, creatures that move along the ground, birds of the air. You've seen these expressions in Genesis 1. And creatures that move along the ground, birds of the air. For I am grieved that I have made them. Now, he's not going to wipe out the fish, the creatures that live in the sea. Why not? Because the way he's going to wipe them out is with a flood. And so, of course, those creatures are going to survive because they live in water. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So Noah finds grace in the eyes of the Lord. He finds favor. Does Noah deserve this or not? Yes, and particularly in this case, Noah is a righteous man, and so the word grace isn't being used here in the sense of, Noah, you deserve to die just like everybody else, but I'm gonna have grace on you and not put that on you because I want to save the planet, save the human race. No, this time he's just finding favor. God looks around and doesn't find favor with anyone except Noah. And so again, if Lamech is his father, Methuselah is his grandfather, it doesn't say too much about them. But Enoch has already passed away, not passed away, but passed on into to be with God. God taking him away. And so now we come to verse 9. This is the account of Noah. Again, this is your next statement in this outline. The previous one was at the beginning of chapter 5, where it said, this is the written account of Adam's line. And now the next big name in the list is Noah. Noah is a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God. He's righteous. He's even blameless, so that's why Noah is not getting unmerited favor. He's getting favor from God. So that's why the word favor rather than grace is used there. Noah was a righteous man and blameless among the people of his time, and he walks with God. And that, again, that's the second time that expression is used, the first time for Enoch and now Noah. Noah has these three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, which were mentioned at the end of chapter 5. The earth is is corrupt in God's sight and full of violence. Now notice something here. You will see this repetition of some of these stories, and in some branch of these stories it says God, and in some branches of the stories it says Lord. L-O, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. And as we've said in a previous lecture, Lord is being translated from Yahweh. Now, how do we know how to pronounce Yahweh? We don't, because Jews did not pronounce it. They were afraid of of taking God's name in vain, using God's name lightly. So in their reverence for this, they didn't say it at all. But the prohibition from God was not against saying his name. It was against saying it in vain. And so to speak God's name is not at fault. It's to misuse and flippantly or profanely to speak his name. That's the problem. But why is it translated then as Lord, which means, of course, master? So why is it being translated that way? Because, point number one, the Jews used to say when reading the scripture, they didn't want to speak that name. So instead, when they would read it, they would read the text, they would substitute with saying Lord, Adonai, in Hebrew. So when the Septuagint was translated, Hebrew to Greek, and they, of course, didn't have the name Yahweh in Greek. So instead of transliterating it and just putting it in that way in the Greek text, they put 4 letters, like Yahweh was 4 letters, YHWH. But they used 4 letters, LORD. And we use that in, I should say, we use that in English. The King James Version did that, and they used that because the Greek had been translated as Lord in Greek, following that example. So every time you use a translation, whether it's the King James Version or the NIV or anything else that says has 4 caps, LORD, now this is where that way of translating it comes from. And in chapter 6, you had this mention of Lord. God is referred to as Lord in chapter 6 in that part of the text. But now when we get to chapter 6, verse 9, this is the account of Noah. Suddenly it's shifting back to using the expression God, Elohim. And so there's this repetition of the statement. Before, it said that everything was wicked and that the people had everything in their heart was evil all the time, and God was grieved and his heart was pained. Now here it says God, remember when it says Lord, Yahweh, it's talking about God close to human beings, God coming close to the human race. How do we know that? Because in chapter 2 of Genesis, when it was saying Lord, it was God acts like a potter, forming mankind from the dust of the earth. In chapter 1, when it says God is speaking everything into existence. Does it mean that one account is right and the other account is wrong? No. It means that one is a general, distant view, and the other is a more detailed, closer view. And the word Yahweh or Lord is used when we're talking about God coming close. Why would Moses write this way? He writes this way because his own experience was when God spoke to him at the burning bush, I am. Whom shall I say is sending me to Pharaoh? I am is sending you. Yahweh is Hebrew third person equivalent for I am, first person. So God says, I am. Moses therefore naturally says, he is. And that is an expression which is used when God comes close to people, which is a very natural thing for Moses to use it that way, because that was his own experience. God came close to him and said, I am. So Moses says, he is. Now, God speaks, he sees how corrupt the earth has become. The people of the earth have corrupted their ways. And then God says to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all the people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now we're getting more specific here, because before it was wickedness and evil all the time. In chapter 4, the chapter which talks about Cain and Abel, but later in the chapter, when Lamech marries 2 women, and he boasts to his wives that because a young man insulted him and attacked him, injured him, that therefore in response he killed that young man. So in that chapter uses Lord. The Lord said to him, and yet it's see how well these two links are tied together. In chapter 4, a Yahwistic passage, Lamech is boasting about his violence. But in chapter 6, where we are now, in this section after verse 9, it's an Elohistic passage, but again, it is talking about the violence. So you do not have two competing accounts. They're all in cahoots, and they're all working together. They're all part of this truth. So God says, because they're violent, I'm going to put an end to the earth. I'm going to destroy both them and the earth. So, verse 14, make yourself an ark of cypress wood. No, why is it called? What's an ark? It's this box. The boat that Noah builds is not intended for plying the ocean seas. This is not Cadiz Ark. This is not a sailing ship. This is a barge. This is a 3-floor, huge barge, and it's just supposed to float, and that's it. It has no steering mechanism. It is not intended to travel anywhere. It's just intended to float. So he makes this big box of cypress wood. Make rooms in it, because he's going to be putting animals, and he doesn't want some of the animals killing others. And coat it with pitch inside and out. Why is that? Well, to make it watertight. Pitch, tar, is being used to patch up, fill up the any gaps and make it absolutely watertight. Bitumen. Coat it with pitch inside and out. This is how you are to build it. It's to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high. This is translated from cubit. Cubit was, of course, a measurement of the elbow to the fingertip. But so that was later standardized at what we now would call 18 inches. And so if you want to say a foot and a half, or if you want to say that 2 cubits would then be 3 feet or a meter. Okay, and so that would be the way of looking at it. So a cubit is basically 18 inches or half of a meter. Again, and so the ark is to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high, and make a roof for it, and finish the ark to within 18 inches of the top, 1 cubit of the top. So there's going to be this vent for ventilation, for air, all the way around under the roof. And I am going to bring floodwaters on the roof, on the earth, to destroy all life under the heavens. Every creature that has the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, every kind of animal, every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. He's not going to have to hunt them down. God is going to send the animals to Noah. He's going to put an instinct in them that they want to be kept alive, and so he's going to give them that. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it away as food for you and for them. So, how about the big predators? How are they going to eat? They eat meat, don't they? It's interesting that all of these big predators are the ones that are land animals and not sea-dwelling. Most of the ones who cannot tolerate being in the water all the time. Many of these the mammals, they all drink milk as babies, and so he could have taken Noah could have taken milk from the milk-bearing creatures and given it to the predator creatures to give them something to eat and keep them alive until while they were in that ark. course, they may prefer meat, but they're not going to get meat. They're going to get this, and maybe that would help them to be more docile. You know, if they were getting milk, maybe they revert to childhood behavior a bit for the duration. Or another way to look at, of course, that you have certain animals that multiply rapidly. Rodents, you know, he could have given those offspring from those to the as food for the others, but I don't think that's what's going on here, because you may say, how about reptiles? How can they? You know, it's amazing how long reptiles can go without eating. There's sometimes they sort of go into a vegetative state, and they can go for a very long time on minimal food, because they just don't move around much when they're in that situation. Noah did everything as God commanded him. The Lord then said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. Take with you," now we're in chapter 7, and notice suddenly when it says Lord in chapter 7, whereas it says God in that last account we were just looking at. But now, as we begin chapter 7, it says Lord, and then it says to take 7 of every kind of clean animal. So, previously it said take 2 of all animals. But then when God comes close to them, he says, of the clean animals, I want you to take 7. Now, why is this? Okay, first of all, there will be sacrifices of clean animals. Secondly, there has to be a concept that some animals are clean. Noah has to have some concept of which animals are clean. So it's interesting that although it is legislated in Moses' law later, there is still a concept here of which animals are clean and which animals are not clean. In Moses' law, clean birds, for example, the vultures, crows, eagles, all these predators and scavengers, they're not clean. And whereas the birds that eat vegetation, they're considered to be more clean. And among the land animals, the predators are not considered to be the kind of food you should eat, but the herbivores, the ones that eat plants only, they are the ones that we can eat. 7 days from now I will send rain on the earth, God says, and for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature. So God tells them that to take 7 of the clean animals and 2 of the others, and I'll take them alive, and then Noah does all of that. Verse 6, Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came on the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives entered the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Pairs of clean and unclean animals, of birds and all creatures that move along the ground, male and female, came to Noah and entered the ark as God had commanded Noah. And after the 7 days, the floodwaters came on the earth. So here you have, God says, a week from now, the flood's going to come. So get all these animals in here. He's got a week to do that. So God has sent the animals to him, and he's packing them all up like a box full of screws, as one poem says, into the ark. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, how's that for precision? On that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodwaters of the heavens were opened. So there, we already talked about this. There you have the 2 sources of the flood, and they relate back to chapter 1, where there was where the water was divided, the water above the sky and the water below the sky. Those 2 huge reservoirs of water are now being broken up to create this flood. Suddenly you have water coming up from below, you have water coming, and that's going to cause a collapse of parts of the earth as the water under the earth is being broken up and to help create the flood. So there's going to be topographical adjustment, first because of that reason, but secondly also because of the also because of all the weight of that much water all over the earth on the planet, crushing down on the earth. The rain on that very day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, together with his wife and the wives of his 3 sons, entered the ark. Now notice, again and again, Shem is being mentioned first. You saw that at the end of chapter 5, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then you saw at the end of chapter 5, it was mentioned that way. And then in chapter 6, Noah had 3 sons of verse 10, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And now here, it's also mentioned Shem, Ham, and Japheth in the same order. Now, so in another place, we are told that Japheth is the eldest. So if that's the case, then how come Shem is being mentioned first and Ham is being mentioned second and Japheth is last? Well, as you see in Genesis many times, the primogeniture that most people expected did not happen. Isaac was chosen over Ishmael, Joseph over his older brothers, and Jacob over his older brother. And so that happens again and again. The oldest is not necessarily first. Ham is younger. He's the youngest. So that means Shem is the middle child. And as everybody says, the middle child will be different. So all of my Semitic friends can say, yeah, that's true. But the reason for this particular order is very simple. This is the order of importance to the story. Okay, Shem, the story of the book of Genesis is going to be primarily about Semitic people, Abraham and his family. And then Ham's descendants will be second, because they will be the ones, for the most part, except for the Philistines, but for the rest, it's the Philistines are sons of Japheth, but the rest of the Canaanites that are going to be uprooted and that Moses is telling them to go in and displace, they're sons of Ham. So they're very important to this story, more important than Japheth is for the story that was being dealt with here. Now, they had with them every wild animal according to its kind, all livestock according to their kinds, every creature that moves along the earth along the ground according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, everything with wings. Okay, this categorization of animals by livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and so that you saw in chapter 1 as well. Pairs of all creatures that have the breath of life in them came to Noah and entered the ark. So again, he did not have to hunt them down, they came to him. The animals going in were male and female of every living thing as God had commanded Noah, and the Lord shut him in. So the animals come to him, and he packs them away into the ark, packs food for the duration into the ark, and then God shuts them in. For 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth, and as the waters increased, they lifted the ark high above the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. Again, they had mountains, but they weren't necessarily at the same height that they are now. Because think of how heavy water is. When you swim, if you swim even 8 or 10 feet down, you notice the pain in your ears because of the pressure of the water. That's only 8 or 10 feet. So think of miles of water, and you would see how heavy that hydrologists could say what kind of impact all that water is going to have. The waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 20 feet. Every living thing that moved on the earth perished, birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. Men and animals and creatures that move along the ground and the birds of the air were wiped out from the earth. Now, there's an argument that some people give to say that the flood is not universal, that the flood is a local flood remembered from the Middle East in this area. The problem with that is there's two things. Number one, it's very specific here. Every living thing. This is not a general statement like all the world came to Joseph to buy food, or all the world came to Caesar to be taxed. It's a wide, just a general statement that's just sent out there to say everybody that they know, but everybody that they're familiar with, the world that they know. But this is getting pretty specific. Every living creature, every animal, every creature, every bird. Not only that, but how do you contain a worldwide flood? A flood that is higher than all the mountains. How do you limit that? Just to the Middle East. The water will keep flowing off. The water will keep flowing away. Water goes downhill. Water will descend to make it equal. So even if the rain was only in that one spot, the water would spread to, even if the rain and the fountains of the deep were only in the Middle East, the water would still spread off to the rest of the world, and you would have a worldwide flood, because we're talking about a year here that goes by. First, a worldwide flood. And notice there are also memories in the legends of the human race. Different people recognize there was a flood, and they have stories of a worldwide flood. You may say these are all legends from their various individual places where there have been floods. Yes, it is possible for there to be floods in different places. But here we have a story of a worldwide flood. And other nations also have the same remembrance of a worldwide flood. Now, everything is wiped out. The floods, Noah was left with those with him in the ark. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days. Okay, we're having different durations here. First of all, there were 40 days. So what happens for 40 days? For 40 days, the waters increase because you have the skies open and the fountains of the deep open up. That's going on for 40 days. Then the water is flooding the earth for 150 days. Chapter 8. God remembered Noah and all the animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark, and he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. Wind over the earth and the waters receded. You see that again in the story of Moses, where the wind coming through the whole night, sweeping over the Red Sea, and dividing the Red Sea so that the people can go through. Now you also see that in chapter 1, Genesis 1, verse 2, the wind of God, the Spirit of God, the breath of God, swept over the waters. So this is showing the power of God, the creative power of God to create the earth in the first place, the wind of God to bring this flood and to bring relief from the flood, the Spirit of God. Remember the same word in Hebrew for spirit, breath, and wind. And the wind of God is sweeping over the planet, just like after the death of the animals, just like God's Spirit was over the waters of watery chaos in chapter 1. And the springs of the deep and the floodgates of the heaven had been closed, and the rain had stopped falling from the sky, and the waters receded steadily from the earth at the end of 150 days. Okay, so the 40 days is when the fountains of the deep and the floodgates of heaven are open, and the water pours out all over the earth. Then we have these 150, the rest of the 150 days in which the water begins to recede steadily. At the end of 150 days, the water had gone down, and by the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Okay, water's going down, and the ark has floated, and when the mountain comes down, the water comes down sufficiently, the ark is now up in the mountains, and in the mountains of Ararat it lands. Now, long ago, in the King James Version, everything, they said Mount Ararat as if it was one mountain. It is not. It's a range, a mountain range. So when we say Mount Smoky or Mount Rocky, we're talking about the Rocky Mountains, the Smoky Mountains, the Appalachians, the Himalayas, so the Alps. Waters continue to recede until the 10th month. On the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible. So you have, slowly. Remember, this flood started in the 2nd month. So by the time 150 days have gone by, which is 5 months, you got to 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th month. And that's why they said on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark rested. So from the 2nd month to the 7th month is that 150 days. And then the 10th month, 3 more months going by, and on the first day of the 10th month, they begin to see the tops of the mountains. After 40 days, Noah opened the window he had made in the ark, and he sent out a raven, and it kept flying back and forth until the water had dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground. But the dove could find no place to set its feet because there was water all over the surface. So it returned to Noah in the ark. Crows, ravens, are scavengers, and so a lot of dead bodies around. There's a place where a lot of the places where a crow can land. And dove, there may be tops of mountains visible in the distance, but they may be too far away for the dove to fly to. So the dove flies around and doesn't see any place to land, and so comes back to Noah in the ark. And so he waits. He took out his hand, reached his hand, and took the dove and brought it back to himself and the ark. He waited 7 more days and again sent out the dove. This time the dove returns with a freshly plucked olive leaf in its beak. And to this day, a dove with an olive branch in its beak is still now the symbol of peace internationally. And so this peace, because the destruction of the flood is over. He waited 7 more days and sent the dove out again. So now we're talking about the 3rd time. The first time it came back because it didn't have any place to perch. The 2nd time it came back and it had found olive trees. So you don't just have the barren tops of mountains available, visible, the water's going down, and now some life, plant life is there. And so he sends it out the 3rd time, and it doesn't come back. So by the first day of the 1st month, okay, 11 months have gone by since this flood started, and the water has dried up from the earth. So now Noah removes the covering from the ark and sees that the surface of the ground is dry. The 27th day of the 2nd month, the earth is completely dry. So they've now been up there for slightly over a year, because they started in this whole thing started in the 2nd month of the previous year, and now the flood waters they've been in there for slightly over a year, and the earth's completely dry. So God says to Noah, "Come out from the ark, you and your wife, your sons and their wives. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, all the creatures that move along the ground, so they can multiply in the earth and be fruitful and increase in number upon it." So Noah comes out together with his sons and his wife and their sons' wives and all the animals and the creatures that move along the ground. They came out of the ark, one kind after another. So he's not just throwing them all out at once. He's selecting what order they will go out. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings. That's why you have a command to have clean animals and clean birds. God smelled the burnt offerings, the pleasing aroma. Okay? God has, these are burnt offerings. They are not wave offerings. They are not a live dedication in that sense. And these animals are killed. And then God says, never again will I curse the ground because of man. Now, he had cursed the ground back in Genesis chapter 3 because of Adam's sin. The ground is cursed because of your sin, but now he says he will not do that again, even though every inclination of his heart is evil from childhood. So the human beings are evil, and they do it from childhood. They're this way. And God says, but I'm not going to curse the ground again. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. Okay. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. So this flood has been a great interruption of the climate, and God says that won't happen again. There will be these cycles of the seasons, and just like day and night, but also the cycles of the growing seasons, harvest and planting, cold, summer and winter. All of this will never cease. It will go back and forth forever. Chapter 9. God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. Okay. Now, he had said that back in chapter 1, and now he's saying again, it's a new beginning, a restart. But he says, the fear and dread of you will fall upon the beasts of the earth. Now remember, they weren't afraid of him before. They came to him to be put into the ark. But now they will be afraid of him. You know, what was Noah feel like, that all these animals that were his friends, that he took care of for a year, and now they're going to be afraid of him. And the birds of the air, and upon every creature that moves along the ground, and upon all the fish of the sea, and they were given into your hands. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves will be food for you. That's why they'll be afraid. Now, Noah and his descendants can eat meat. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. So he's now allowed to eat meat as well as vegetables. So he's not only going to be vegan now, he's going to be so the meat special pizza is now okay from that standpoint. So he says he's going to give them all of this food, and that's why the animals will be afraid of him. The animals have to live too. They have to survive, so they can't just line up to be slaughtered. Verse 4, but you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood still in it. To this day, the kosher meats are, the butchers will slice the throat. They will drain out the blood. This is essential to that. They must not eat meat with the blood in it. By the way, that is confirmed in the New Testament. That is endorsed in chapter 15 of Acts as a rule that stands in the New Testament church. So there are people who say, I remember some people when we said this, they said, but if you drink blood, that makes you strong. If you're a hunter, you know, when you kill your first deer, you're supposed to slice the throat and drink some of the blood, and you'll never be the same. Well, that may be a custom, that may be a tradition with long background in it. But when our traditions conflict with God's word, we have to drop those particular traditions. And God says, you do not eat the blood. The blood, God is the one who gave the life. The life is in the blood, so that belongs to God and not to us. God also makes us, remember, God creates us, and he gives us a human body that is not designed to be drinking blood. Now, or eating blood. So therefore, trapped animals, animals that are killed in traps, and they die in the trap, and the blood is still hard and congealed in the animal, so that's not kosher to eat. An animal that is an animal that does not have, for some reason, the blood drained out of it. That's the important point that we don't eat. Balut, Filipino balut. Okay, it's called it's the name of a fertilized egg, which they then cook when it's just before hatching. And they cook that, and that is, of course, KFC used to have what they call chicken littles. Well, how's this for chicken littles? But no, you don't eat that. And why not? Because the blood is trapped in the meat. It is not something that we should eat. Blood sausages in Northern Europe, Western Europe, Central Europe, sausages with blood. No, this is not to be eaten. Whatever our culture is, whether it's the Filipino or the sausage, blood sausage culture, whatever is something that is the blood in it, that has to be eliminated from because of God's own decree. When God gave us permission to eat meat, now they may have eaten meat. Remember, people were very violent and corrupt and wicked before the flood. So to say that they never ate meat before this, we can't say that. Some people may have done it against God's rules, but the animals were not afraid of Noah, and they came to him. So Noah himself is following God's law. He's righteous, he's blameless, and so now God says, I'm giving you the meat to eat, but you must not eat with the lifeblood in it. And for your lifeblood, verse 5, I will certainly demand an accounting. And God demanded this before. Remember, he said to Cain, your brother's blood cries out to the ground from me. I will demand an accounting for every animal, and for every man too I will demand an accounting of his life of his fellow man. They've been very violent. Lamech boasted about killing somebody who injured him. So God is saying, I will require an accounting. Verse 6, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. So this is a capital punishment response for premeditated homicide. Okay, and because in the image of God, God has made man. So God has made human beings in his image, and we are not to kill God's image. And so whoever does, God authorizes that person's blood is to be shed in return as punishment, in retaliation, in revenge, in payback to them. As for you, verse 7, God speaking to Noah, be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it.